Pokemon Sword and Shield is overall a great game for the series since it brought a lot of new interesting features. But with any Pokemon game, throwing in new changes is not going to keep every player happy. I finished Pokemon Sword and caught all the Pokemon that are possibly obtainable without the Isle of Armor or trading. And after seeing everything that the game has to offer, I do have some thoughts on what Game Freak should focus on for the next Pokemon game based on my thoughts, as well as the overall player feedback that I've seen and heard. One of the biggest criticisms that Pokemon Sword and Shield has received is its lack of voice acting. For me personally, it wasn't that big of a deal because you spend most of your time catching and training Pokemon anyway. But a lot of people have argued that having no support for voice acting in this day and age, when other RPGs have been doing it for years, is quite disappointing. But at least now they've managed to show that compared to previous games, various NPCs show some form of lip syncing and have facial expressions. But I guess this is something that the Game Freak team may have to consider for upcoming installments of Pokemon. With every generation of Pokemon games, there's always a new set of Poké Monsters. With this one, there's a mix-up of both good and bad. I really liked Rookidee's design as well as the evolution family of Rookidee. I managed to catch a brilliant Aura one that knew Sky Attack at level 7, and the fact that Corviknight is a Steel type along with its evolution made a lot of sense. Its Flying type, for instance, would initially be a weakness against rock types, but at the same time, with the flying/steel type combination, it totally made up for it and everything just becomes super neutral. Sirfetch'd just completely transformed the potential of Farfetch'd, and with the leak item, the crit rates just flew through the roof. Mr. Rime just looks like a design error, and it looks like they just had to force an additional ice type element to the Mr. Mime family. Maybe because of Jynx? Sparta. Just plain Sparta. Duraludon looks like it would have been nice to have a bit earlier in the game, but even when I happened to stumble upon it in the wild, it was after I put in a good amount of time to even encounter it in the first place. Ninjask was just incredible, especially if you managed to catch it early in the game. Namely because it knows False Swipe. And the incredible thing about this move is that you can easily get the opponent down to 1 HP and you can catch almost any Pokemon this way very easily. I am actually a big fan of the first generation of Pokemon. I think nearly all of the OG Pokemon have their rightful place in the Pokédex. Even Gen 2 was fine, honestly, with Gold and Silver. But with each new generation after that, I've noticed that the designers may have gotten a bit lazy or just ran out of ideas in general. For example, here's a squirrel, here's a fat squirrel, here's a polka dotted diamond with shades, here's an apple, and by the way, one of its abilities is ripen. Here's a teacup. Okay, a very sinister teacup. Here's some fresh fondue. Here's some not for kids stuff. And this one's not new to Pokemon Sword and Shield, but of course the infamous garbage Pokemon. Need I say more? So I think that generally Pokemon games don't require you to level grind unless you're just the type that prefers being high leveled all the time. With Sword and Shield, I feel like it was way too easy to get rare candies and experience, especially from visiting max raid dens over and over. With that being said, it would be nicer if they introduced some type of level scaling or change of difficulty. In other words, maybe a flag that enables in-game trainers and opponents to kind of level with you. But then this should not be some type of exploit, because then you can get that much more experience points, so maybe a limiter around that as well. I completely understand there are people out there that prefer being over leveled and actually like one-shotting enemies. But I'm sure there are also those that would like to see some adjustment options here. And as a lot of people would agree based on what I've seen and heard, I wasn't a big fan of the starter Pokemon with this generation. Sure, the designs are nowhere near the first or second generation, but even when you look past that, there's a huge discrepancy in the base stats of each of these Pokemon. With a lot of the previous starters, you at least found some level of balance, regardless of which one you decided to go with. Given a fair assessment here, Grookey, for instance, doesn't really bring anything extraordinary outside of a decent attack and defense. Sobble, on the other hand, is highly focused on special attack and speed. And last but not least, Scorbunny gives you both attack and speed. And so Scorbunny was the clear-cut winner for me, especially since it learns actually decent moves pretty early on, so it kind of gives you that edge. Also, Pyro Ball is one of the best offensive moves in the game since it has 120 base power and 90% accuracy. For the other two starters, their signature moves only have a base power of 80, so it's almost as if the designers highly emphasized the fire type and just wanted you to go with Scorbunny. When the game was released, I was not a big fan of Dynamaxing or Gigantamaxing. It was a huge change that came out of nowhere and it seemed like it was a joke. But after having played the game, I wouldn't say I totally hate it, but I still don't see the advantage of it. Because outside of online co-op for max raid challenges, I see more disadvantages to these giant transformations over anything else. First of all, redundant and generic moves make it pretty boring aesthetically, since the move you decide to do ends up executing some other predetermined boilerplate move. And if you're not doing this with an online group of people, the attacks and capabilities of the computer players are either severely mediocre or sometimes even super OP based on what attacks their Pokemon know. The initial difficulty of these fights can take away from gym leader challenges, since gym battles become easy over time, whereas max raid battles vary based on the number of stars that you're seeing. The way online connectivity works in this game, process-wise, was not up to par. Every time you chose an option that needs internet access, it always has you wait to connect to it every single time. This includes, but is not limited to, max raid battles, mystery gift, and victory station. With Pokemon Sword Shield, EXP share is something that was forced for the entire team, which was interesting. Usually in previous generations, you would acquire some item at some point in the game that allowed you to do exactly this. But with Sword and Shield, it's on since the start, and unfortunately it cannot be turned off. I personally don't have a problem with this, since most of the time it's been more helpful for me as opposed to being a headache. But apparently a lot of people were not fans of this change. So overall, Sword and Shield was definitely a nice addition to the series, but I'm still looking forward to another game where we're not seeing washed out Pokemon designs, a modern leveling system, better starters, and consistent online connectivity. Thanks for watching, and for more on Pokemon games, please consider subscribing to this channel.